Ethan Vance sat in his office on the 45th floor of the Westgate Tower, looking out at bustling Manhattan. Below yellow buses were just colorful specks on the street, and the blaring horns were muffled by the thick soundproof glass. He was the CEO of Westin Dining Group, a corporation with hundreds of restaurants across the country. This position should have filled him with pride and power, but instead it left him with a cold, hollow emptiness. On the ebony conference table, a stack of financial reports lay neatly. The bold letters, 15% growth, stood out on the cover, but Ethan paid it little mind. He turned to the next page where a chart of employee turnover rates showed an alarmingly jagged curve. The polished-looking directors seated opposite him scrambled to offer flowery explanations. It's the culture of the new generation. They have high demands. There's a lack of engagement. The words sounded smooth and articulate, but to Ethan, they were just meaningless noise. He looked into their eyes and saw only deceit, a clever concealment. They were trying to protect themselves, not the corporation. In that moment, an all-too-familiar image flashed in his mind. It was the image of his mother, Sarah Vance. Ethan closed his eyes, and memories rushed back like an old film. His mother wasn't a senior executive. She was just a dishwasher at one of the corporation's first restaurants. He remembered her hands calloused from chemicals and hot water, but on her face, a smile always shone brightly. She believed her job was a vital part of maintaining a big family. But that belief was shattered. One time, an old dishwasher broke severely, burning her. She wrote a detailed report about the incident, hoping for a repair to ensure everyone's safety. In return, she was fired for poor performance. Ethan, just a 22-year-old boy at the time, watched helplessly as the woman who had raised him alone fell apart. The physical pain could heal, but the emotional wound could not. Her smile vanished, her eyes became hollow, and she passed away a year later. That rainy night, standing before his mother's grave, Ethan swore to himself that he would never let anyone endure similar injustice and hopelessness. He had lost his mother to a cold system, and now he had to be the one to fix it with his own hands. He could no longer trust the fabricated numbers on paper. He had to find the truth for himself. 2 weeks later, Ethan walked into the kitchen of Northside Grill under a new name, Kyle. His tailored suit had been replaced by a faded shirt and worn jeans. He had an average appearance, easy to blend into the crowd. The smells of grease spices, sweat, and a hint of a sewer pipe hit him a stark contrast to the luxurious perfumes in his office. The kitchen was like a chaotic machine with dozens of parts operating at once. The clatter of knives and cutting boards, the sizzle of frying pans, the shouts of chefs, and the sharp, bellowing commands of the manager, Frank Thorne. Frank was a gruff-looking man, his uniform straining over his oversized body. He often boasted about his ability to clean up financial reports and constantly mocked his employees for their inadequacies. Amid the chaos, Ethan noticed a woman working silently in the dishwashing area, almost invisible. She had blonde hair loosely tied in a faded cap and a stained apron. That was Clara Jensen. She moved with her own rhythm like a dancer in a cramped space. No complaints, no rush. She meticulously scrubbed each burnt pan and every messy stack of plates with surprising care. Her hands chapped and red from the chemicals brought back a painful memory of his mother's hands. Then an incident occurred. A young chef made a mistake with an order, and Frank, with an angry look, held the order ticket up to Clara. "What the hell is this, Clara? Table 12 ordered salmon. This is steak. Are you trying to ruin my shift?" he roared. Clara didn't resist. She just quietly bowed her head. Ethan, as Kyle, could only stand there and watch. He felt the profound injustice in her eyes and her resigned gestures. Ethan understood that Clara was not fragile. She was a woman who was used to enduring. The way she arranged the plates, the way she scrubbed each stain, was not just a job, but a way for her to find peace amidst life's chaos. He knew he had found the person he needed to find. That night, after everyone had left, Ethan lingered. He pretended to check inventory in the storeroom, his eyes following Clara. She was still diligently working. When everything was clean, Ethan witnessed a sight that wrenched his heart. Clara stood in front of the trash can where leftover bread from dinner had been thrown away. She didn't hesitate, carefully picking up a dry, intact piece of bread, wrapping it in an old napkin and putting it in her pocket. Her action was neither secretive nor shameful. It was simply a deeply ingrained habit, an action performed by someone who was all too familiar with the struggle to survive. Ethan quietly followed her home. The old, dirty and gloomy apartment building was a complete contrast to his high-rise tower. He hid in the shadows, watching through a gap in the torn curtains of the ground-floor apartment. The dim light inside allowed him to see her world. Everything was simple old. Clara gently helped her mother Eleanor out of the bedroom. Eleanor was a frail woman with vacant eyes, as if she had forgotten the world. Clara whispered loving words, spoon-feeding her mother porridge. Afterward, she helped her younger brother Leo with his math homework, patiently explaining each calculation. Ethan saw the exhaustion on her face, but her smile was still warm. Finally, when the two were asleep, Clara sat alone. She took the dry bread from her pocket, holding it like a treasure. She looked at an old family photo, then into the darkness of her mother's room, and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. I'm fine. I found a big piece of bread today. I still have a job. I still have money." She smiled to herself and took a small bite. That moment completely broke Ethan. It wasn't just a story about a poor woman. It was a story about someone who had learned to hide her pain, learned to console herself in silence. He realized Clara was the embodiment of his mother, of all the people being trampled by the very system he was running. His tears fell in the darkness. He knew he had found what he was looking for, and it was more painful than any number on a report. After the night he followed Clara home, Ethan's attitude in the kitchen changed. He was no longer just an undercover CEO investigating. Now he was a person who genuinely cared. He watched Clara not to find evidence, but to understand her better. He noticed small details no one else in the kitchen did: her worn-out shoes, the way she always dried her hands before touching anything, and how she would slightly lower her head whenever someone yelled at her. Ethan began to find ways to approach her. He spent more time in the dishwashing area, pretending to learn how the machines worked. He asked her simple questions. How should I stack the plates? How do I clean this pan without scratching it? Clara, initially reserved, slowly opened up. She patiently guided him, her voice warm and clear. There was no sarcasm or condescension in her tone, even though he was as clumsy as a child. Her non-judgmental warmth made Ethan feel like he belonged here, in a place he had once considered completely foreign. One afternoon, when the kitchen had quieted down, Ethan sat next to Clara. "Do you always work at this pace?" he asked. "Yes, it helps me stay calm," she replied. She told him about her 14-hour shifts, the days she had to work double to prove herself. Ethan knew this was one of Frank's tricks to exploit labor, but Clara accepted it as a natural part of life. His anger towards Frank and the apathy of the very system he ran grew even more intense. The pressure in the restaurant was mounting. Frank Thorne, with his greedy and tyrannical nature, continuously made things difficult for Clara. He cut the hours of other employees, but forced Clara to work longer shifts without extra pay. He even openly mocked her, calling her a smiling slave in front of everyone. Ethan had to restrain himself from revealing his identity. He knew he needed irrefutable evidence to bring Frank down. On a busy Saturday night, when the kitchen was at full capacity, an incident occurred. A glass bowl shattered in Clara's hand due to a sudden temperature change. She instinctively flinched back, and a shard cut deeply into her palm, creating a raw red gash. "I'm okay," Clara quickly said, hiding her injured hand behind her back. But Ethan had already seen it. He followed her into the storeroom, where she was rinsing the wound with cold water. Her lips were pressed together, trying to conceal the pain. Without a word, Ethan took a crisp linen handkerchief from his pocket. He gently bandaged her wound. Clara looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Do you always carry one?" she asked. "An old habit." He smiled. She nodded, the confusion in her eyes giving way to gratitude. It was the first time she had felt cared for, cherished in a long time. Their bond deepened during a major storm one night. The city lost power, and North Side Grill was plunged into darkness. The decorative candles were lit, creating an eerie yet cozy atmosphere. Ethan and Clara cleaned together the candlelight, illuminating her tired but serene face. They didn't talk much, just worked side by side to the sound of rain and thunder. Amidst the chaos outside, they found peace. Ethan realized that Clara wasn't just a hard worker. She was a bringer of peace. She was the small light he had been searching for. The tension reached a boiling point during an evening shift. Once again, Frank blamed Clara for a botched dish. This time, he didn't just scold her. He threatened to fire her on the spot. "You think just because you're quiet I don't see you sabotaging things? You're just a burden to this restaurant," he roared. Ethan, unable to restrain himself any longer, stepped forward. "It wasn't her," he said, his Kyle voice sharp and full of indignation. "Clara wasn't even near the order station today. I was there, and I saw everything." Frank glared at Ethan. "Who the hell do you think you are, kid? You've only been here a few weeks." As Ethan was about to reply, he felt a small hand grasp his sleeve. It was Clara. She stood beside him, her face pale but her eyes full of pleading. "Please don't, Kyle," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's okay. I'll handle this." Ethan turned to look at her, stunned. "No, it's not okay at all." Clara shook her head, tears welling up. "No, it is. If I get fired, my mom will die." In that moment, all sound in the kitchen seemed to cease. Ethan stood frozen, looking into Clara's desperate eyes. Her painful confession was like a knife twisting in his heart. He realized her endurance wasn't a sign of weakness, but of love, of the survival of her loved ones. She was carrying an entire world on her shoulders. Frank Thorne mumbled a few words and stormed off while Ethan pulled Clara into the break room. Clara could no longer hold on to her strength. She sat down on an old chair, her shoulders shaking, and silent tears streamed down her face. There were no sobs, no complaints, just the painful silence of someone used to crying alone. Ethan didn't say anything, just gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Clara leaned into him, like a boat finding a peaceful harbor. And in that moment, Ethan made a decision. He didn't just want to fix a system, he wanted to heal a heart. He wouldn't let her cry alone ever again. The incident in the break room was a turning point. After that night, Ethan became more determined. He was not just gathering evidence, but preparing for an inevitable confrontation. Under the guise of Kyle, he continued to work, but every action he took had a clear purpose. He covertly installed small recording devices, copied files from the office computer, and took photos of the financial reports that Frank had doctored. The deeper he delved, the clearer he saw how Frank's corruption and tyranny had distorted not only the work, but also the lives of employees like Clara. After that night, Clara became a little stronger, but still kept her quiet demeanor. She noticed the change in Kyle. He was no longer just the clumsy colleague, but a true friend. The look in his eyes was no longer curiosity, but respect. One day, Clara fainted from exhaustion in the storeroom. Ethan caught her feeling how light her body was in his arms. He carried her to the break room and placed her on the old sofa. The first thing Clara said when she woke up broke Ethan's heart. "Am I going to be fired?" That question was a bitter reminder of her constant fear. Ethan held her hand tightly, a silent promise. "No, you're not fired. Not ever again." In the following days, Ethan and Clara worked together seamlessly. She no longer had to take the blame alone. Whenever Frank tried to make things difficult, Ethan stepped in to defend her. Their relationship was not a whirlwind romance, but a bond built on understanding respect and shared silent pains. Ethan realized he had fallen in love with Clara, not because of her story, but because of who she was, a resilient, brave woman full of love. One Friday morning, a company-wide meeting was called. Employees whispered worried. Frank was smug, believing this was his moment to be praised. When Ethan walked in, everything went silent. He was not wearing Kyle's faded uniform, but a sleek suit. Frank was stunned. "Who are you?" Ethan walked straight to the front. "My name is Ethan Vance. I am the CEO of Weston Dining Group." The air in the room froze. All eyes were on him. Ethan didn't waste words. He pressed a button on a remote and a large screen lit up. Surveillance camera footage began to play. Each slow-motion clip laid bare the truth. Frank berating Clara, blaming her for mistakes that weren't hers, and even the scene of Clara collapsing from exhaustion. Then an audio recording played, capturing Frank's hostile voice as he planned to exploit Clara and other employees. The truth was undeniable. The entire conference room was in absolute silence. Everyone looked at Frank, who stood frozen, his face pale. Then a soft but resolute voice rang out. "Did you think that just because we were silent, you could do whatever you wanted?" Clara stepped forward. She was no longer the Clara of before. Her hands still trembled, but her eyes were filled with determination. She looked Frank directly in the eye and said, "I used to think that survival meant staying silent. But I was wrong. I have the right to work without fear. We all have the right to live, not just to exist." Her words were like a lightning bolt, awakening everyone. The employees, from those who had mocked her to those who had been silent, looked at Clara with admiration and awe. They understood that all this time, she had been the one bravely enduring on their behalf. Ethan stepped down from the podium, no longer just a CEO, but a man standing beside the woman he loved. "Clara, you didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for the hundreds of people out there who are afraid." He turned to Frank, his voice full of authority. "You're fired, effective immediately." Everything ended in the silence of relief. Clara looked at Ethan, her eyes teary. "So, you were watching me all along." Ethan smiled gently. "No, I wasn't watching you. I was learning from you. I learned how to listen, how to lead, and in the process, I learned how to love you." Clara's tears fell, but this time they were tears of release and happiness. 6 months later, Clara's life had completely changed. She returned to medical school, a backpack on her shoulders and a radiant smile on her face. In the evenings, she worked with Ethan as a senior advisor for the employee support program, using her own experiences to build a more humane and fair system. Her mother, Eleanor, was living in a special care facility funded by the company. One day, when Ethan and Clara visited, Eleanor opened her eyes and called out her daughter's name. "Clara," she said. It was a sacred moment. Clara hugged Ethan tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. "See, Mom remembered?" Ethan held her close. "You gave her something to come back for." Clara gently shook her head. "No, we did." Ethan smiled gently, lifted her chin and kissed her. It was a kiss of gratitude, of hope, and of love. Clara was no longer the invisible girl in the dishwashing area. She had become an extraordinary woman, finding love and strength from her own story, and together with Ethan building a better world where no one had to live in fear and silence.